When I was 5, I lived with my mother and father and older brother.
At least I could draw, I told myself.
It was just me, my cats, and my imagination.
Created protective cover, just enough where he could keep his underwear on.
There we go.
Tonight we have Carol Burbank, and I'm going to read her bio here to give you some background information. So, Carol Burbank is a writer, coach, educator, and editor living outside Washington, D.C. For the past 20 years, she's mentored creatives through story weaving with a vision to help writers and artists find their voices and confidence as they expand creative work from a dream to a reality. A commitment to creativity opens up a space for alchemical transformation for artists as well as the people they touch with their art. This work evolved out of everything she loved about being a professor, nurturing curiosity and discovery and a passion for calling. It evolved to be part of her own continuous exploration of stories, the stories she told about who she was and what the world is and what she and the world could be and might become. Her recent poetry plays with the story of Jezebel in the Bible and in our culture today. She moves from obsession to obsession, veering from playing with archetypes just to see where they would take her. One year dinosaurs, another year moonflowers, to highly serious dives into ancient stories and myths, like the Jezebel Project. 2025 is the year of the dragon, which promises to both be playful and serious.
Great.
So,
Nice.
Carol, tell us a little bit about story weaving and what gravitates you towards artists, being an artist yourself.
Well, story weaving, I've been running story weaving for about 20 years, and it is geared towards supporting artists and writers. And I do one-on-one coaching and workshops, and I also write columns and other articles that are related to creativity, and teach classes. And like you said in my bio, it's basically the best part of being a professor. I get to really be a person who walks a creative journey with someone, not with the idea of my voice being the most important thing. My own writing is where I do that, but with the idea of their voice being the center of our work together. And I have an incredibly wonderful and diverse clientele. I love the people I work with. Two of my authors just won really nice honors. One of them a pushcart prize. And many of my authors self-publish. I mean, it's really about what is it that you need to do? What is it that you want to do as an artist and as a writer? Let's get there, and let's be that person in the world who makes art, because it can be real lonely, and the world doesn't always call you up and say, "Hello, Carol, we'd really like you to write a book about Jezebel. Yes, please do it now. Thank you so much, and we'll give you $10 billion. Bye."
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't happen. Jezebel comes and she sits at your living room table and she says, "Hey there, write about me. Hey there, I'm not leaving until you write about me." And then you write about her. And that's what has happened with all of my authors. They are called to write a book. They need to write it. They deserve to write it. And they want to write the best book they can.
Yeah. Well, I know, being, one of your writers, that I know what you can do. And I think that, again, you're a great listener, but you also have that ability to go right into that little piece in there that needs a little tweaking. And sometimes it's quite uncomfortable, but you're always pretty right on. And you have a way of doing it that always, and I certainly always feel supported.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
And I've become a better writer under your tutelage, for sure. And I know Val has too. But my question, and I love the question, is in terms of your own coming into being an artist. When you were a kid, what's your earliest memory of kind of knowing I'm different in that way that creative kids are, that you aren't really, a follower, and maybe more of a leader, but you want to do your own thing. So do you have an earliest memory of that?
I do. I grew up in mostly in New England, but for 2 blissful years, in second and third grade, I lived in San Rafael,
Huh.
and it was my favorite part of my childhood, and there was so much freedom there, and I knew I was different from the other kids. And the good part about it was that I never really felt stigmatized or
Mhm.
outsider because of it, because it was San Rafael. And
Well,
this,
now for people who don't know, San Rafael is in California,
right, it's
in
just
Marin
north of
County.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Marin County.
Yeah.
And I grew up, I grew, and we had this cool house with a it just was a really cool California house. And when I went to school, I never really did anything that the other girls did. I played marbles with the boys, and I was really good at it. And when we chose our 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 California Indian teams, I was on the tools and weapons, and I spent a lot of time trying to learn how to create obsidian arrowheads, which
Yes.
I could never do, and my hands were always cut up. But I was happy as a little fake Indian child making obsidian arrowheads and trying to figure out how that worked. And we played, we acted out hunting, with bows and arrows. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, because life is sexist, I played the deer. I remember that, but it was fine. I died with great aplomb. And I also was given a lot of space to just be myself and to be creative. So I remember there was a sunken space with pillows all in it in the school, in my classroom, and we would have performances. We would just talk. My teacher was Miss Smith, and Miss Smith would let us do things. And my mother taught me a very funny song, and I sang the song, which was it. And it just didn't occur to me that it was inappropriate. It goes, I'm a villain, a dirty, rotten villain. I leave a trail of blood where I tread. I delight in picking a fight and bashing little babies on the head till they're dead. I have gotten a rep for being rotten. I put poison in my mother's shredded wheat. I'm a blot on the family escutcheon, and I eat raw meat. Well, I was, in third grade, second.
That makes me think of Little Miss Sunshine, the movie where she gets up and does the striptease. That's great.
So I did things like that, it didn't occur to me not to. And in fact, I was not really squashed in any way, so that
Yeah.
I had a lot of space. I'd go up in the hills, and I would go into places where you weren't supposed to go. Like, I remember California was heaven for me. I'll just tell one more story from there.
Yeah.
There was a place where there were some cows or bulls, and we would go up into the hills, which were preserved above our development. And I remember one day the cows chased us up into a tree, and we, ate our Cheerios and drank our milk and waited till they just kind of wandered away. And then, it just was really fun. And I don't know, I don't think a lot of people would claim that freedom. I think that's something that made me different. And I was the same even when I moved back to more straight-laced Connecticut. I always, if there was an opportunity to do something a little whacked, I was there.
Yeah.
That's the best adventures.
The mold that creative kids, early on sort of fit into. Yeah,
For sure.
that's great.
And I wrote too, in fourth grade, my best friend Tammy Banks and I, we got those little notebooks that you use to take tests in and to practice your writing, your cursive in your other writing.
Yeah.
And we would give each other prompts and we would write,
Wow.
what does a chair think? How does a chair feel? How does a tree feel? Tell the story of somebody that gets lost in the woods. And I don't remember. I still have all of them. And they're, but we did it obsessively. We were, I have 10 books full of those prompts.
Well, you still do that. I mean, I think you asked me to go talk to your character, go have a drink with them and see what they have to say.
That's so cool. What a great way to get to know your character.
Yeah, it is.
So it kind of became your Bible and your confessionatory, and kind of confessional,
What
a little bit. Your writing in your in your books and stuff like that, writing about what a chair thinks.
In a way, it did, Val, and in a way that all of our writing does. But it wasn't like today I did this and then the other thing. It wasn't like a journal. It was. What does a chair think about the world? What happens when what's the story of the button that falls off the dress? I mean, I don't remember all of them, but the chair one was really true. We said, what is the inner life of a chair? Why did we think that? I don't know. Tammy and I were writers together. And we also made up vast stories in the schoolyard. There was this old stump, and and it became the center of theatrical stories for
That's great.
All on the playground.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Again, at an early age, if somehow words become your medium, and as a child, when you learn the power of words, it never leaves you. I mean, I think then we, as adults, we know about what writing can do, how powerful it can be.
It's really true.
Yeah.
And I learned to read really young, surprise. And I also was read to. My mother actually decided it was okay for her to let me learn to read. She was not reluctant to have me learn to read, but she was really hoping I would wait until I got to school, because sometimes it can be boring for someone who knows how to read when they get to school. But I used to follow her around. She said, you followed me around with Mary Poppins, which is one of my favorite books that she read to us. And you'd say, what's that word? What's that word? What's that word? And it would be, in the house. I didn't know how to read at all.
Yeah.
And so she bought me books that would teach me how to read. And then she said she would take me to the library and I would get 10 books. And then she would, that was the only time I was quiet. That's her joke. But I would sit in the back and read them. And by the time the day was over, I would have read all of them. And then we'd have to go back. I'd say, but I've read them all,
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, and words have always had a lot of power for me.
Yeah.
Always. Words are kind of in my DNA.
Yeah. I think that's really true. And, and that leads me to the question of, I know you do write poetry, and for you, how did you make that transition from, a proper sentence into, a more dreamlike way of saying something? Because I think of poetry as being more dreamlike, speaking more from the unconscious, or whatever we want to call it.
Oh yeah. Well, actually for me, it was the opposite direction. When I was young, I wrote when I was in 4th grade, I wrote little paragraphs, but I already started writing poetry, rhyming and unrhyming. And so the bigger transition for me was, how do you move from poetry to journalism? How do you move from poetry to theater? Because I was writing poetry when I was a kid.
So that came first.
The poetry came first. And I think it actually is because I have always been somebody who dreams really deeply, actually, in my sleep, and also looks at the world kind of in a dreamlike way and sees things that other people don't see. So the way to write about those things is rarely in a linear way. It's to write poetry. And so I started with poetry and imagistic exploration with my best friend Tammy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it a
Well,
way for you to understand the world? Do you think that you use that too? Because I remember as a child that I would play out in the woods and act out being a boy and have a stick as a sword, and I'd go save Snow White, and I would act these things out. So do you think it was a way for you? It was a way for you to create this safe space for you to explore your feelings and emotions, and then it just kind of stuck.
Um, yeah, in a way, although for me it was always bigger than just exploring myself. And even when I was a kid, I had journals, and I have those too. And those journals are exactly what you're talking about, Val. They were like, I can't believe this thing happened today, and oh, I hate my life, and I am. And all of my play and all of my writing had an element of me adapting what was happening in my life and
Right.
in my world into it. But I think one of the reasons that I wrote even when I was really young is that I knew I saw the world differently from other people.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I still see the world differently from other people.
Yeah, you do.
And so, but as someone who always sees the world differently, I by writing about it in my poems, it wasn't that I was writing, I feel this way, I feel that way, although I did write those too. It was I'm writing what I see, and what I see is not something I can talk about at the dinner table. What I see is not something I can talk about with my friends, except for maybe Tammy, and we weren't friends for the rest of our whole school career. We were just, it was, oh, look at that truck. It looks like a fish. What happens when a fish becomes a truck? And then I would write about that, right?
Oh.
And it was a bony fish. It was a skeletal fish. So I would, and so I would see it, but I didn't feel comfortable. I knew by the time I was in sixth grade, I think I knew I shouldn't be just saying, hey, I saw a fish that had turned into a truck,
Yeah, you learn. Okay, we can't voice those imaginings and be accepted.
Yeah, and yet they have to go someplace. So in that way, Val, I totally agree with you. And there is also this incredible pleasure for me about playing with words, and I expect you all find that as well with whatever medium you're in, color or words or the combination. And I've always been a little synesthetic around words, so that a word will taste good to me. I don't actually taste food, but I feel a word. So when I find a word that I really love, I'm like, ooh, I got to write with that word. It's a yumminess.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's true.
Cool. That's a great way to
I think
think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Karen, what do you think about that? Because you're an artist, you draw, and you create design and wonderful designs. But do you find that you have favorite sort of, I don't know, images, or what do I want? Does just like
Maybe shapes or
circles
concepts?
or
Well,
yeah.
always love squares, but I'm coming into like circles now.
Nice.
Always been square. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
But you know what I do is right now I've done 2 picture books. One was a genealogy where the woman's family tree went back to Farmington and Abraham Lincoln, and she did have a lot of photos, but I I like to tell the story with photos,
Yeah.
And so the book I'm working on now is about a startup in the 80s with robots, and she had a lot of photos too. But I'm like, oh, you need to know who this Atari guy is. You need to introduce him. First, you need to introduce your husband. Then you need to introduce the Atari guy who he started working for. Then you need to introduce the guy who started the transistor, because that's how Silicon Valley's, so
Yeah.
I dig in and I learn a lot, but I'm just gathering images to help tell their story.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well,
Very cool.
that word gatherer, I think as writers, as artists, we're gatherers.
Absolutely.
And I don't know about you, my house is just bulging with things. I can't stop anything I find. If I find something and I like it and I put it, everything. I got stuff everywhere. I know you do too, Carol. I think you guys all do too.
You can see behind me.
Look,
Oh,
the
yeah.
imagery is all constantly playing through, and you don't know what you're going to do with it, but it's always marching through.
I can barely go to the beach and not pick up
Yeah,
something from
I
the
know.
beach home, and it sits with all the other rocks.
I have drawers just full of trinkets and things that,
Me too.
I end up, I had a miniature Coca-Cola bottle forever and had
Yeah.
no idea what I was going to do with it and
Yeah.
ended up,
Yeah, you keep it. Yeah.
sculpting this little couple sitting on a bench, and he's holding the Coke. That's how it ended up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I collect stories in that way too, and I used to write them down,
Yeah.
and sometimes I still do, but now I kind of trust that they're going to resurface in whatever form they're going to need to resurface.
I do too. I used to write stuff down too, but now I find that, it's kind of like, because I'm a psychotherapist and I work with clients and I hear stories all day long. But I found that if I don't write them down, I actually remember them in a different and I think a better way because they just become part of a greater story and it just sort of, I don't know, mushrooms and becomes, and I don't forget it.
That's cool.
I don't have to go look at my notes or what did the person say. I remember it. That's somehow the way I remember it. And I think as writers, on the one hand, we have to let our minds go, because we all know those moments when something is really working. It's magical, and you don't know. Oh God, I can't get those moments all the time, and we have days that can go by with nothing. It just feels sterile, but then suddenly you have that, surge of
flash of brilliance.
Yeah.
And then it was like saved for that moment. I feel that too as a writer, Jan. That it's like some things I'm like, okay, I'm going to write that down, but then it will resurface later,
right,
in a connection that I was having problems making, and I'm like,
right,
okay, and then
mm-hmm.
maybe that's why it resurfaced at that time and why it was even pronounced in the beginning, because it was going to be somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's going to show up.
So I agree.
That's why I started. That's why I started my year of the theme of something, because that was one of the reasons. And I started during the pandemic when we were on lockdown, because I would get to the end of the day and I'd be like, I'd be a little crazy. And so I declared it the year of plastic dinosaurs. And I bought a whole ton of plastic dinosaurs, large and small. And then I would move them around the house in these scenarios. And then I would take photographs of them and plague my friends endlessly with the Tyrannosaurus Rex stealing my pepperoni chips.
Yes.
And
that's great.
Through something. And so I started to document their lives. And they got to know Guanyin, and a whole bunch of them decided they were going to worship Guanyin, and they're still worshiping Guanyin. One became a mountain climber and climbed up the curtain. They gradually made it just went on and on and on. And for me, I've been doing this long enough to know that I can trust that this odd and fun behavior, this play, would turn out to be something in and of itself. Like it might be a poem, it might be a song, it might be nothing. It might just be that I was exercising my creative muscles, and I just trusted that at the end of the year of the plastic dinosaurs, I would not only be sane and entertained, but I would also have something that would pull me forward. And I've been doing it ever since. And some years the theme is a very minor part of the year, and some years the theme is so big, it's so huge that I do 4 or 5 explorations of a theme every week, like I did with Jezebel when I started doing that research. And I wrote essays. I did research on Jezebel. I studied the Bible. I looked at all the different versions of the Bible and the Jezebel story, which is only 39 lines explicitly about her and one psalm about her marriage. And so it's what, 60 lines. And I made collages, and I wrote poems, and I wrote a little play, and I just sort of would go, oh, because she'd go, hey, come on, Carol, come on, I got something to say. Or someone would say something to me, and Jezebel would go, you're gonna let that go. And so I'd write a Jezebel poem about what somebody said about, and about politics, or about how their art wasn't worth a hoot or whatever. It didn't really matter. And so I generated all of this work, and it was a real obsession for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And that's part of knowing that what we're obsessed by, we don't have to be noting it down as, oh, I have to remember this story idea I'm going to forget. It's that the process of creativity for me brings me into a place where I can be free and find that flow that feels so good, even though sometimes it's a lot of work to revise and
yeah. Oh, I know. But what you're talking about is that really, really important element in any creative work of play.
Yeah.
And if we cannot play, I think I really think that's the reason, people have something called writer's block, or, just, the work isn't coming anymore. When it becomes rote or work and not play, then I know I lose interest. And I know for me, in writing my books, looking up all the background stuff, and a lot of it you don't use, but I just love those days when I can just be free to look up anything I want and do anything I want. And, I had an altar, to Mami Wata up in my office at home. It was huge. And I go in there every day and play around with it. I just loved it. And, I fed her Coca-Cola and candies and stuff and little pretty trinkets. I played with it all the time. So a lot of people think, I must have gone to Africa. I didn't. I brought Africa to me.
Right, exactly. And I think curiosity is a big important part as well.
Yeah.
You have to be curious about the world around you, and about people, and about things and places and stuff like that, and how we are connected and not connected, and the human condition, and love, and all that stuff. It's just so interesting and so profound. So I think curiosity is Carol definitely has that, a lot of curiosity, and I think that's a very important element to have as well.
Oh, you go into her house and you can see her house.
Oh yeah.
I felt right at home when I walked
Flying cow.
In your house. I walked into your house and I went, oh, these are my people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to be curious and to play and let it go. And you're right. I think that is behind artist's block or writer's block. It's like, I know, I want to tell a story about an artist friend of mine who, she's having a rough time because before she had a stroke, and before her stroke, she actually was an artist who made these exquisitely detailed representations of animals, birds, and people. So it was almost like she was taking a photograph of their inner nature. They were so beautiful. And now she makes these exquisite squiggles, but she knows that she has lost something. She's sentient and she's whole and she's still in there, but she can't translate it. And so she and I are starting a project, and you're talking about squares and circles reminded me about this, Karen, because she and I started a project because I went into her studio, which is the coolest studio I've ever been in. It's full of art. I mean, you all would just be so inspired. It's full of, stuffed foxes and
I love foxes. Yeah.
sticks and odd pictures, and they're all at angles, and And there's a whole series of things that had circles of beautiful paper that had circles on them. And so she and I are starting a project, and I don't know what's going to happen, but where we're each going to work with circles. And I don't know if we're going to trade images and embellish each other's images, or if we're just going to work with circles and then compare notes and have conversations about it, because she's desperate to get back to the creative flow. But she looks at her old work and says, I can't do that anymore. And she feels such a loss, but she's obsessed with circles. Like, she has all these circles that are drawn on these beautiful, in this fine, thick paper. And I'm like, well, let's play with circles then.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens when we play with space in that way. And I need to do that. I want to do that. I've become obsessed with circles now.
Yeah. You know, I mean, that really makes me think, you know, connecting back to what Pam and Val talked about, being amputees, that once you lose a limb, your life is never going to be the same. And you either you know, fall by the wayside, or you live with this new change, which is huge. And new things come of it.
Absolutely.
You know, new things that you never would have thought of or expected come after, you know, something like that happens. And I think, I really do think, again, creative people are more aware of that possibility, that there are possibilities in everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I was just agreeing.
Yeah. I was just going to say that the other thing that creativity and creative people are able to do is we reinvent ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, when there's a loss, like an amputation, or when there's a change in relationships, or when time brings us into a whole different phase of being, or a whole different relationship with the world, we actually have many, many more skills to reinvent ourselves. Because we have, I sometimes think we are more fearless, but that's one of the theories that I'm willing to let go of.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's a lack of fear, but sometimes it's also just a desire to explore. Like, we just are driven to seek and explore. And so in that, whether it's a physical change or a social change or whatever it might be, that exploration is part of our being. So we don't stop. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do.
Yeah. I look at the fact I lost my leg. My accident was in 1994. So I've been longer without a leg than I have had one.
You need to show Carol at some point your booth.
I'll show you right now. Hang on.
You got to see what she wears. Okay.
Actually, it's different than you saw last time.
Oh, okay.
It's got a new socket.
What a great, that's great. Did you paint that?
No, this is one of my favorite podcasters. We went to one of their live shows, and it's a t-shirt.
I love it.
So yeah, they laminate t-shirts on them. But yeah, it's kind of fun.
We decorate our lives. We reinvent ourselves. You've reinvented your leg.
Yes. And, you know, I wouldn't, but for me losing my leg, I wouldn't be who I am and where I am.
Right.
And I really like who I am and where I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And once you can realize that about yourself, it's so much easier to look forward, you know, to say, let's go on to this next adventure. Let's, you know, go in this direction. Let's explore this.
Yeah.
Not so much fearless as knowing that you're going to continue reinventing yourself. Is that maybe what I'm looking for there? So. Yeah, you're just going to continue on this path. It's going to be a good one, regardless of where you end up. You're going to find joy somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it's this journey to your personal truth, you know, and how your own personal truth is, you know, part of the human connection and separate, you know. And I've only lost my hand, I mean, almost 9 years ago. So I've had my hand more than you've had your leg, you know. And I have actually told people that I'm grateful that it actually happened to me, because I wouldn't be where I am now. I think it had to position me to where I needed to be, because I wouldn't have done it without that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it had to be something dramatic and traumatic to shake me up. And I think when you're shook up like that and you're redirected, it can be a good thing.
It strips you down to your core, and you have to really completely look at everything. Well, you do look at everything differently.
Oh, yeah.
You realize that you're not immortal. You realize that bad things can happen to you and do happen to you, but you can move on from that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is a parallel situation, but I've been thinking recently about some of the helpful failures in my life. And I think that this is something that, like, I remember, I worked really hard to get a PhD, and then I thought, well, I'm going to become a professor. And I got what was considered in the field a really gold opportunity with a Research One university, which turned out to be the worst work experience I'd ever had in my life. And I had to come to grips with the fact that I had brought myself into the wrong profession or the wrong place or the wrong way of being. And that if I was going to thrive and not just survive, I had to reinvent myself. I had to rediscover what I could become. And there was no path for me to stay in the academy because I had arrived at the top, and I either had to stay there or go. And when I left, I spent, I think, 6 months just kind of saying, who am I? I don't know who I am anymore. I don't have a story for who I am anymore. And that was so good, because it's in a different way. It stripped me down to the bare bones of who I was. And it made me realize that I couldn't just with my will shape my life. I needed to actually answer the call of the world, not just the call of my ego.
Right.
And my ego was like, rebelled for quite a while. And I had a messy life. But now but that's where story weaving came out of, right?
Yeah.
And that's where your art's coming out of. And it's not about the loss or the failure. It's about the exploration and the reinvention.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
And what we're talking about is it goes on all the time. I mean, in little ways, many ways, and mega way, huge ways that that can in the moment feel like, oh my God, nothing, it's all over. But who you are is, again, I think creative people are fairly irrepressible. In other words, the herding cat image is I think a good one, because we don't fit in well to corporate world.
We don't.
I don't know anyone who is creative, and I know, and I do have clients who are in the corporate world who I will say, you need to get out. You just need to get out.
If y'all would believe it or not, I was a claims adjuster for 10 years.
Oh,
You talk about a soul-sucking job.
yeah.
I had to completely switch gears on that, because it was good money, but it was not worth it.
I know. The money just,
There are more
Won't
important
do it.
things for sure.
Yeah.
So now I'm a poor librarian, but I'm very happy.
Yeah. Yes. And happiness is it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
for artists and writers, whatever the product turns out to be, I've come to believe that we need to engage in the process of creation. So however my Jezebel project gets out in the world, whether it's in just a series of small poems that show up in journals, whether it's a book, whether it's a performance that I do, whatever it might be, the process of it was probably more important than the product. And I don't want to just leave it languishing, because I know Jezebel will come back and get me, and she will not. Just kind of
Well,
hide
she
her,
showed up for a reason, I assume.
yeah. So yeah. So I mean, I think that one of the things I think that the people I talk with at first have trouble with is that they think people used to say, I want to be an Oprah. I want to be on NPR. I want to be famous
Yeah.
in that way. I want my book to be I want to be Toni Morrison, or I want to be whoever they think is the be all and end all. And yet they don't know what I have to keep relearning. I just want to own this. They get to start learning that the process is a requisite pleasure of our way of being. Yeah. That we can't just write a book and put it out there. It's not a transactional thing for an artist. The process is what feeds us, and then getting it out there, sharing it, also feeds us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so important that we have both. If we didn't have both, I mean, there would be no point. If I could just snap my fingers and, oh, my book's in here, then I probably would be very disappointed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I, again, I think being an artist is as much as we think of artists as being introverts, and a lot of us are, but we're also very social.
Mhm.
We're both. But the social is more intense usually, and we really crave being heard and being seen. Because we need to be. You can't just create in a vacuum, and not have it go anywhere. I mean,
Right.
that doesn't work. But so it's kind of it's sort of navigating the inner and outer all the time that artists need the freedom to do.
Yeah, I love that, navigating the inner and the outer. Do other people resonate as much with that as I did?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah.
It makes,
Yeah.
so much sense.
Yeah. Carol, you've talked about Jezebel, but I wanted to ask, and I wanted to ask if, about when you first started talking about her, how did she show up? When was the first moment Jezebel showed up to you?
Well, okay, so I started getting obsessed with Jezebel when a Baptist preacher called Kamala Harris a Jezebel. And I just thought, what? This conventional, bureaucratic, wonderful person who has a government position is a Jezebel? Yeah. What? Because I was
great.
as a whorish stereotype.
Yes.
So I thought, well, let me find out. So I read the story in the Bible, and that's when she showed up. She showed up almost immediately. She showed up as this presence. First, she showed up as this beautiful queen, because Jezebel dies. She's standing in a window, an arched window, and she's standing there when the new king comes, and her eunuchs push her out the window. She's given this dishonorable death, but she dresses entirely in her priestess garb, and she stands in the window. And when I read that, I saw her there, and I saw the intelligence in her, and I felt her, and she saw me.
Wow.
And that image has stayed with me and stayed with me and stayed with me, because her death has been interpreted so many different ways in so many different contexts. And then as I started to write Jezebel poems that were about modern day Jezebel power, because Jezebel in the Bible was a Phoenician queen who actually was a brilliant legal mind, and also was just on the wrong side of the Hebrew dominance of their one God. She was multiple gods, and they were one God. And so Jezebel had a very long life. She had like 1 million grandchildren. She died at, probably then it would be middle age, but she wasn't this young woman when she died, but she was so beautiful, and her in the archway, and I became so excited about her story that I started to chase down all these other stories. And then I met another Jezebel who was the modern Jezebel, who's like the woman that you're at a dinner party and you sit next to someone and you go, well, who's this? She leans in and she says, what are you doing with your life? How you doing tonight? You looking you're looking like you didn't dress for the occasion. You know, like the person who's just honest with you about things.
Yeah.
And they want to know the answer, but they don't hate the way you dress. They just want to know the answer. They want you to be as big as you are. And she started visiting me. And that's the one that comes back. It's the more private Jezebel, because I wrote a lot of stuff about the biblical Jezebel, but we don't know a lot about her. I think she was a real person, but we don't know a lot about her.
We don't. Yeah.
So the modern day Jezebel is who I thought, well, this is the spirit that I want to embody, that it started to come and visit me when I refused to pay attention.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I love that. I really love that. Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's really, what's really interesting about being an artist in the way that I'm an artist with my characters is that they are real to me. And until I've done them right, then they're going to bug me. And, you know, it's the same as visual images. Like you see them everywhere. I've talked to artists who say, oh yeah, I thought, I'll do a picture of a crow. And then suddenly all they see are crows, and crows confront them, and they have to deal with crows. And then finally, when they're done with crows, the crows go, okay, I think that's fine, but we'll come visit you every now and then. And they do. You know, but it's almost like the part of our dream life that feeds our creativity is alive in our waking life.
Yes, it is.
In a healthy way.
Yeah.
You know, there are people that don't see the visions in their mind when they read a story. They don't see the movie. I can't imagine how sad for them, you know, that they don't have that. And I didn't realize for the longest time, I just found that out a couple of years ago, that some people, because I always wondered, you know, there's people that just don't read. They're just not interested. It's boring to them. Never got that, because the second I open a book, the stories, you know, the movie's running in my head, and the characters are very, you know, very much there. And it really made me understand why some people just don't like to read if they're just seeing words on a page. But to be able to bring that character, you know, full front in your mind, and to live with them while you create the story, that's amazing.
I agree. And I think, unfortunately, some people find that, you know, taking off into that, you know, kind of imaginary world or whatever is frightening. And, you know, I think we live in a time now where there are a lot of people who are frightened by that. Yeah.
Well, it does take discipline to navigate that world.
Yes, it does.
You know, it's not like if Jezebel showed up every night at dinner, I'd have to sit down with her and say, okay,
yeah,
you're my obsession. I know it. But you can't. I can't give you 24/7.
You can't ruin my life by showing up every night at dinner and telling me, you know, what I should or shouldn't have done.
Right. And she never was that kind of a presence. In fact, sometimes but what I've learned to do is almost invoke, I give the characters the space they need to be present. And I do the work that they've drawn me to do, but they're not like schizophrenic voices. I mean, they're part of my creation. They're part of my psyche.
Yeah.
And when things are complete with them, and they teach me what the story I want to tell is, they are part of the writing. It's not, and I think what frightens people is that fear that they're going to be controlled by the imaginary.
Well, that's true. I think that's true. Yes. And well, they're going to be controlled by it, and they don't. And how do they deal with that? Or, you know,
so they don't remember their dreams. They don't read books. They don't challenge their imaginations because they don't know how. They've not experienced the joy of having it as part of the larger fullness of being human and being creative.
Yeah.
That makes me think of a story. When I don't know, it was probably 2003-ish. I got really into gnomes and trolls and goblins and things like that to, create. And so I dove right into it, bought a bunch of books, had all these references and was going through them and found some really cool stories, especially on some gnomes. So my mom was at my house and I was like, I got really animated and I was telling her all about this and, how cool these little dudes were. And, they had their little families and blah, blah, blah. And my mom was just sitting there going, they're not real, right? And I was crushed. I was like, you just missed the entire point of what I was saying, the entire reasoning for my focus on them. They're real in my mind right now, and that's the point. They need to be for me to be able to really immerse myself to create them. But yeah, just the look on her face, she was just like, oh God, she's lost it,
Yeah.
I've
I
seen
think
that.
being gifted as an artist, I think being gifted as an artist, you also, it transcends what we know here. And I think that it gives us a glimpse into when we cross over, I think there's something there connected. And I think that's why we were chosen as artists or as an instrument to,
it's like you can touch that dimension right next door and, reach that muse that's just across that veil kind of thing. Yeah.
It's something way bigger than all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we're all talking about the same thing. I think we all do have that. And when someone like your mom, and she's being a mom, how do you tell her? Well, no, actually, it's quite real.
Yeah. That's what I was like. You just missed the whole point, Mom. It's real to me. It's real in this moment. It needs to be real because that's how I'm going to create it.
Some of us don't.
Yeah.
Not everybody does.
She doesn't. She does, and I've asked her, when you read, because she is an avid reader. And I'm like, when you read, do you see the movie? And she does, thank goodness.
Okay.
So she gets that part of it, but she's just not big in the little creepy crawlies and the funky creatures that I'm into.
Well, one of the when I date, one of the things that I know if I can really date someone is if after a while when you're figuring out, oh, I can date this person, if I can say I am totally obsessed with dragons now, and they go, oh, really? Why? Instead of dragons, what?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have a pet dragon that I feed cheese to. Yet.
Good. Everybody should have one, but I know.
It'd be fun. But it is. Now
I bet he would eat
I'm
smoked
gonna
cheese.
have to have a story about how dragons really like mozzarella cheese. Because it's about giving yourself, and as children we did this all the time. But as adults, it's having a space to play. So if somebody, I don't care if somebody wants to play with exactly the way I do, but if they decide I'm weird because I do something with playful obsession, then we probably aren't going to get as close as I might like.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, because there's that initial disappointment, and then you just don't bring it up again, and then there's, just a disconnect there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you can't be your authentic self, I mean, that.
Yeah, and it turns out that my authentic self arranges plastic dinosaurs around my little guanyin and leaves them there.
Yeah, I love putting, very, little creatures together in little scenes and unlikely pieces together, like little forest creatures. And then, I can have an angel and a dragon or, something. And it all works in my mind. But people who go around my house, what are you thinking?
It must be fascinating to see what they light on in your house.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I love this conversation. It reminds me, Jan, when Jan was telling me about her grandson going to OSA art school, and you couldn't get in if you were just good. You had to be obsessed.
Yes.
The
Yes.
teachers knew the difference.
Right. They knew the difference.
Polished portfolio
Right.
and someone who was maybe on the spectrum, And I like to think maybe I'm a little on the spectrum. I'm okay
Right.
with that.
Right.
Right.
If I get a project, like Jan's book, The Ghost, I needed to know what a bear's claws looked like. I needed to know what that looked like when I needed to know what the teeth looked like when they were roaring. And I could do that all night.
Yeah.
It's just, detective work and just studying the little curl of their nostrils and how it's different from a dog, and so if somebody asks me, Karen, what you working on? I'm like, well, let me tell you, really go over very well.
Well, that's great you remember that, because I forgot that, but I remember, we were at Cameron's school, and he got in, but there was a mother there who was very angry and very disappointed, and we saw her daughter's portfolio, and I think I asked a teacher kind of in the background. I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, we don't look for that kind of perfect thing. We're looking for the kid who draws on everything.
Right.
Their pen, their book, their desk, those are the kids we want, not the kids who, have done this perfect, thing. And it was really enlightening to me because, I remember, my grandson, he got into the theater part, but he was always acting out somebody, he couldn't contain himself. And at times we had enough is enough, Cameron. But he was constantly acting. It wasn't just I'm playing a part now. He couldn't help it. It was jumping outside of himself all the time. But that's kind of the thing, that you get obsessed. You have to. You
Yeah,
have to.
it's the core and the essence of it. If
Yeah.
you have to become completely obsessed and ridiculous
Yeah.
and
You do.
all of that to
Right.
evoke this person to life
Right.
or whatever you're doing,
Yeah.
And I like that. That gives me hope, because
Yeah.
I've never been conventional in anything I've ever really done. And
Yes.
and
Same.
you have to be thick-skinned to be an artist, and I'm learning that, and I'm still persevering and going whether somebody doesn't like my work or not. I don't care.
I know. We all have to get through that. We have to.
Yeah.
And it's hard because actually, so I'm thinking about it. I have a neighbor whose yard is gorgeous, and I really love these people. But their yard is gorgeous because they mow the lawn every 2 or 3 days.
Mhm.
They take care of it the way I take care of my writing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet nobody says, "Oh, that nice couple, they're weirdly obsessed with their lawn."
No.
They say they always have such a beautiful garden and lawn.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of creative obsession or uncreative obsession, that kind of obsession is rewarded in some areas and not rewarded as explicitly in others.
Right.
So one of the things I think happens to us is explicitly in relation to what you're saying, Val, is that we have to get thick-skinned because it is who we are.
Mhm.
So if they like my Jezebel poems or not, and it bugs me, I have to practice getting over that.
Yeah.
But most of the time now I'm like, ooh, this is too tender for me to send out right now because it'll bug the heck out of me when I get rejections. So I'm going to work on revision, and then I'm going to be brave.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things I know about you, Val, is that you are so brave. You just
thank
go,
you, Carol.
hey, I'm just sending it out. I'm just sending it out. You have a thick skin.
Yeah.
But we all feel disappointment when someone doesn't see what we're trying to show.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that our obsessions are weird or wrong or bad. It just means that they're not the perfect lawn that
Right.
other people might say is a good obsession,
Yeah.
Right.
or their children, which might be a good obsession.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being obsessed with the people we love, but it can be as healthy and wonderful and expansive as our relationships with our characters or our books or our art.
Yeah.
But it's just that those relationships with art have been put in a little corner by society because
Yeah.
it's different.
Well, I think they don't want people to think. Once people are able to think, then they
Yeah.
won't follow status quo.
Mhm.
Just to put it, I mean, that's just a baseline. You could go off on that for days. But I really think when somebody's starting to think and feel and create things that other people might be afraid of or don't understand or don't want talked about or might subject change, then they're the weirdos. They're the, you're going to be stigmatized because they think you're onto something.
Yeah. We have a saying, especially at our library, and a lot of libraries have this, is that we have to have something in our collection that offends everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We want everyone to be offended by something in our library.
Yeah.
And that's the way that, we've really, with as small a town as I'm in Southeast Kansas, it really helps our patrons to see that too, to recognize,
sure.
it's okay that I'm offended by this because something that I love, someone else is going to be offended by. And when they can recognize that, then it makes our collection less dangerous, I guess is the word, to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. We're living in those times, aren't we?
We are.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure are.
I was thinking, I thought of a story when we were talking about obsessions, that it doesn't directly relate to the offense, but maybe it'll roll in somewhere. I remember when I was getting ready to leave that academic job, my grandmother moved and I got her TV, it was one of the ones that is a huge back and, that not like it was huge. And I hadn't had a television ever in my life. And except for a little teeny black and white one. And so now I had this really big old fashioned TV and I was watching way too much of it because I wasn't very happy. And so I said, oh, this TV, it's eating my soul. So I started writing poems in Sharpie on the TV.
I love it.
And so I'd write a poem in Sharpie on the TV so that you could barely see what was going on behind it. And then I would leave it up there and then I'd turn on the TV and I'd watch TV through the poem. And then I'd go, oh, that poem doesn't work anymore for that show. So I'd erase it and I'd write another poem. And finally, I realized that nothing was going to make me stop watching the TV, so I threw it away, or gave it away. But for about 6 months, I wrote poems and Sharpies on the TV, and I have no idea why, but this act of defiance against my grandmother's big old TV helped me kind of put together the grit I needed to stand up and own what I was really feeling.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was about the writing. It was about writing on this thing which I was really needing to entertain me, but it was in the writing. And I wish I'd photographed these poems. I don't have any.
I know.
Dang it. That's too bad, Carol.
But it served a purpose as writing and art. It was a performance art, my private performance art.
Right.
Very cool.
And
very
it
cool.
was and maybe this is what ties back to what we were saying about how everyone needs to be offended by something. In the library, we all need to find something offensive that we actually read or talk about or think about, because we have to interact with things that are different from us. It's not us being different in the world and people have to interact with us. We have to interact with them and all the other differences.
Yes.
Or else what is the point of our art?
Yep. Good point.
Yeah. Carol, it really, I'm so glad we got around to getting you on, and I think you've done just a great job of
Oh, thank
letting
you.
us know who you are. And this has been, for me, it's always fun. I love doing this. I love you guys. And I don't know, I'm so glad we found our way to do this.
I am too.
too.
Thank you for having me on the show, and I'm going to subscribe and pay close attention to it. I mean, good conversations need to be had and shared with others.